I'm really excited today for my conversation coming up with Ralph Bloemers on How to Disaster. Ralph is a friend and a colleague. He's one of those people that when he calls, I'm just so excited to pick up the phone and talk to him about a wide-ranging number of topics. Today is going to be much like our conversations that are offline. So we're going to cover everything from how did he even get into this space? He is an environmental law attorney, but he's also a really accomplished storyteller about the story of fire and how fire is interacting with the built environment, or especially over the last 10 years. He has done several films from Elemental to Weathered with his filmmaking partner, Trip Jennings, which is on PBS now. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I think you're going to learn a lot about how you can actually protect your own community, the role that each of us can play and have agency in this era of megafires. And I'm just so excited to spend this time with you. Thank you. Ralph Bloemers, welcome to How to Disaster. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Chad.
For those in the audience, for listeners, I want you to know that Ralph is a friend, a colleague. He is multidimensional. He's in so many spaces. And I like talking to him so much that when he calls and I see him on my caller ID, I'm like, do I have an hour? Because that's how I know how long it's going to take. And I know that we're going to, traverse a lot of subjects, and I'm going to come out knowing a bit more or having a better strategy for something that I'm trying to do, especially if it's up on the hill. And so I'm really happy to have you here today. And I would like the audience to get to know all of the things that you do in this space. So can you introduce yourself and where, so many titles, so many hats. Go.
Yeah, well, my journey with fire started as a kid. I was always sort of very curious and fascinated and unsupervised. So, I spent quite a bit of time with matches and lighting things on fire. And I grew up on a farm in Virginia, and luckily it was relatively humid there, so I didn't really have major consequences. But early on, I learned about the paradox of fire, and I lit my mom's garden on fire. So I went inside. We grew up on a cheese farm, and I went inside to make myself a cheese sandwich. And I came out with my friends, and I could see that her entire garden was smoldering and smoke was rising. And it was about a half-acre garden. And we had been playing with the gas pump nearby or something. And we went and turned everything over and watered it down. And she came home and didn't really know anything had happened. That year I paid the price, though. We had quite a bumper crop of zucchini and squash, which I detested, right? So fire was not a destroyer in that circumstance. Fire was a stimulator of life. And fast forward in my life, too, I'd gotten a law degree, and I'd worked at a big corporate law firm. I'd worked in the insurance industry in Germany and in London for the largest reinsurance firm in the world. And then I was doing public interest environmental law. And I got a call from a guy whose job was to light fires for their benefits, a prescribed fire guy, worked for the Forest Service in Eastern Oregon. And, he was contesting something that the agency for which he worked was doing that he thought was illegal. And I agreed to represent him in court. And I'll leave that story aside, but basically I went to a burned landscape thinking it was destroyed. Like there wasn't much there for me. It wasn't interesting. And I was blown away by it. And I got hooked on not just the beauty in burned landscapes and all the wildlife in them, but the politics of the science, the politics of the narratives around it, all those things, right? And in Oregon, where I live, what we do with our forests is something we fight about. And it's either you're a spectator for the spectator's forest management, or you're a participant. And I was definitely a participant. And I got to know scientists, and I just kept going deeper in that world. And so I was really first and foremost until 2017 and 2018, I was really focused on forests and fire ecology and natural systems and rivers and all that kind of thing. And then it just turned into this humanitarian mission of, stories to end conflagration, I call it. And so that was kind of my intro into the world, was burned landscapes and beauty in the burn. And the first thing that I did was try to take people on that visual journey. So it didn't relate to how do we protect homes and communities. It related to helping people understand fire better through time-lapse and wildlife photography. And then that led to a lot more.
Oh, there's so much more. You're going to have a lot to talk about for sure. I don't know if all the listeners are going to be aware of sort of how policies prevented good fire for so long in this country, and that has absolutely contributed to this era of mega fires. To the frustration of multi-generational farmers, indigenous people. Can you fill people in a little bit if they're not aware of that?
Yeah. So, we came, most of the settlement of the West was folks from the Garden of England, and they weren't used to fire on the landscape, right? Fire was not a thing in the wet United Kingdom. And so when we came and there was fire on the landscape, fire being used by indigenous folks, it was outlawed. It was criminalized. People were, viciously treated for doing something that they had done to tend the land for millennia, since the retreat of the ice sheets in the Pleistocene. So there was a lot of fire exclusion, right? And so for every fire not taken out, the vegetation grew in certain landscapes more intensely, in the dry types. But the other piece was our understanding of our abilities to control fire or suppress fire were really built up during a cool, wet climate period from the 40s to the mid-late 80s. In other words, it looked like we were really good at suppressing fire, but what was really giving us a huge helping hand, or actually doing the putting out, was the weather. And so that created an expectation that we were in control of fire as well. So the two things kind of coincided, and that the buildup of fire suppression came after World War II with surplus military equipment and things. So this two things kind of collided to sort of amplify, not in all landscapes, right? But in certain landscapes that have more frequent fire, if you're taking fire out of those landscapes, then they're gonna change, right? And they're gonna change in ways that when fire comes, fire will be more intense.
Well, like where I live in Sonoma Valley, when the indigenous populations lived here and there were no Europeans yet, they would come here, they would spend time in the hot springs, and then when they left, they would light it on fire, and then it would be healthy for the following year. So they didn't have these major, huge fire events in the same way. And one of the things that reminds me when you're talking is that I have a keychain that my husband bought me that I love. It says "Fire bad, but also good," because it's very much what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, and Margot Robbins, of course, from the Cultural Fire Management Council, you're
She's amazing.
Indigenous fire practitioner, fire lighter. Fire just is another way of looking at it. I mean, I think a bridge is fire good, fire bad, right? Fire bad when it burns your home doesn't grow back. Fire generally, for like the systems in which I live, Western Cascade Forest, rainforest, it burns actually in really big, intense fires. That's how our systems burn where I live, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It resets them to a young forest, right? And I like to liken a burned forest to like a young person. It's full of potential. It's noisy. It's sprouting up in all directions, right? It's been reset. It's at its earliest stage. It's just, again, one of those paradoxes is we love these places as we know them. We love them because they're born in disturbance, fire, flood, right? They're wild. They have a wildness to them. And I would just use that as a lowercase w, wild, right? But they're influenced by us as well. And that's what you're talking about, right? We as humans in this landscape have been lighting fires forever, and will continue to do so. There's just a paradox, right? Are they sometimes lit with intention for a good reason? Are they sometimes lit for not the right reason, carelessness? Both are true. And it's like wrestling with those paradoxes of good fire, bad fire, or just coming to a place that's like moving from a broken relationship with fire to a relationship with fire. Yep. I think is what is so inspiring about what Margot and the Cultural Fire Management Council, what they're living, what she's passing on to her grandchildren, her children and her grandchildren. Now they know a river that's undammed. They, know a landscape that they can use fire on.
Can you introduce the audience, though, to what her program is, so that we can drop a link below, but they may have never heard of Margot Robbins, and she's very cool. So she does a very specific thing.
Yeah. So in Northern California, there are several tribes, and one of them is the Yurok, and that's YUROK. And it's in the mid to lower Klamath, is their ancestral territory. And it's very steep country rising up from the Klamath River. And in and around their village sites and their where they live, in around a 50,000 acre area, they're doing broadcast burning. So they're burning very steep ground, not pile burning, right? But they're burning like the ground in the understory. They're doing it in tan oak stands to stimulate growth and where they collect acorns for food. They're doing it to stimulate plants like hazel, but they're also burning around houses for fire safety. They're retrofitting their houses. So fire is a tool that they use, and their very sort of minimum tools approach, using fire on the landscape instead of masticating or using machines. And it's just a practice that they've had, forever on that landscape. So they're basically tending the land with fire.
And then teaching really Western culture, how to do it and why it works, because we were prohibited for so long. Like I'm 56. And so the whole time I was growing up, all I heard was only you can prevent forest fires. And it was Smokey the Bear. And that was it, that all fire was to be suppressed and avoided at all times, which is why visually what you were talking about earlier is our visual markers for how a forest should look is wrong. It's actually much more crowded. It's got a lot of understory. I say it with lovingly, like the garbage forest, like the stuff that should have burned the understory. So when you go through a forest, you should have space between you. It shouldn't be clogged. Like a lot of our forests here some of them look much worse post 4 mega fires, like way up on the mountain tops. That looks worse. But down in the valley, it actually looks much healthier. And a lot of the places that we never treated prior to 2017, we now treat every single year. And now my eyes have adjusted. Now I understand. I don't see it as a loss anymore, but instead what it's maybe supposed to look like. It was quite an adjustment to see, though.
Yeah, there's a lot there in terms of, let's say, United States, like in Oregon, we got 60 million acres of land, half of it's forested, 30 million, and a portion of that is dry forest types. Those would be the areas where you would see much more open as a result of fire. The ponderosas would survive. They would have, the canopies would be up high. There would be a mixture down below. So it's going to depend, but like in the Klamath, there's some history, like some of the ancestral territory of the Yurok is owned by timber companies. There's some history of logging. There's some stands where it's really going to be hard for them to put fire back in first because they're so dense, because they were really heavily planted after they were cut. So, there's a lot of different things that we as humans have asked of these landscapes and, built up our expectations. And one was timber production. And that was seen as antithetical, right? Fire was antithetical to that need. And Smokey kind of delivered a message of fire bad to protect forests so they could later be cut down. And Smokey also kind of demonized fire for a good reason, which was to get careless humans to be less careless. So, it's fun talking with Margot about Smokey and with other indigenous folks around Smokey and what the issues are from their perspective, which is, it was a very simplified message around fire for results, right? Mm-hmm. When what we need is a much more just sort of embrace paradox message, right? Of moving from victim, all of us, of fire to in a place of empowerment, I think. And sort of shifting to that, to like, what's the lesson from that for all of us living in fire country in the built environment? it's just been really interesting to see the parallel, right, between
Yep.
how Margot and Robert and Elizabeth and the Cultural Fire Management Council view their role of like being intimate with the landscape. And then like folks like Keegan Gibbs, who is essentially delivering the same message for his community in Malibu and the Santa Monica Mountains, right?
So
Which is,
Keegan is one of the founders of the Community Fire Brigade. For those of you who don't know, we are going to have him on the podcast at a later date for sure. So side note, love.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is a guy whose community burned in the Woolsey fire and, he was torn up by it and he didn't have an understanding really of what he could do. And he went on a journey and he met this guy, Jack Cohen. And Jack Cohen is really spent 4 decades studying why and how communities burn and what we can do to prevent them from burning. And he did this in the lab and he helped found the IBHS Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety Test Facility. And. I mean, the guy did so much stuff, right? And he's in the film Elemental Reimagined Wildfire, but he's really this guy that, he's essentially the same message in many ways as indigenous firelighters, which is accept natural realities, accept that fire is part of this landscape, accept that it's inevitable. And this is the hard one, again, another paradox for us, because it means we have to accept stupid human-caused fires as much as they aggravate and destroy communities and are really unacceptable, right? But they're inevitable. And so if we accept that they're inevitable, as hard as that is, it means what? And it means adapt. It means become intimate with your place, know your neighbors, know your community,
It's also, though, that megafire, in my view, is one of those solvable things as a crisis. It doesn't mean that we don't have fire. It means that we don't have to have fires that are this devastating. We don't have to lose 16,000 structures. If we can harden the built environment and manage the wildlands, fire will come through, but we do not have to suffer to this extent. And that's one of the things that I find exciting about being in this world. Is as frustrating as it is sometimes, especially to get the message to land, has been really, really hard. And I also just want to, before I forget, to put a note in that one of the things that I think, because we've suppressed fire for so long, and then the message then for some environmentalists, not all, was that we should never touch the forest either. And instead, like, people have been interacting with the forest for thousands and thousands of years. It's just, how are we doing it? And so I think there was, until recently, like a lack of understanding that we can't just totally leave it alone, because indigenous populations had been living with it for thousands and thousands of years. And so I know that I've had to completely change my own understanding of fire over the last 8 years, because it just scared me so bad in 2017 that even the idea that we would have this many prescribed burns was not anything that we would have embraced immediately, just because we were in trauma. So I think people are afraid, which goes so much to the entire argument around climate change and, climate disasters, and none of it's personal. That's the thing. We just have to address what is and move forward according to the environment that we're in. Like, you have different conditions in Oregon, but you've certainly had your share of megafires, especially in 2020. So since you're talking about the built environment, let's go there. So you've worked on some really cool projects. Can you kind of walk through those and then talk to us about what you're working on now? Because you somehow transitioned into filmmaking at the same time as being an environmental law attorney. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in 17, there was a fire that raced towards the city of Portland, ash rained down, and folks tried to make sense of that. And I started on that journey with Trip Jennings, who's a Nat Geo filmmaker and is the director of a program on PBS called Weathered. And it's really some of the best science communication out there. And I think the reason is, instead of telling people science and facts, it takes them on a visual journey. It takes them on whatever the journey is around the subject matter. And that's what we did with Elemental. And, we did a lot of interviews and ended up with folks that could take you on a journey around forests and carbon flux, take you on a journey on the built environment. And the guy there is Jack Cohen. And there's others. Derek Alconis is what I call a conflagration detective. but basically a fire investigator who goes and looks at the mechanism of ignition. And really what you're seeing in these fires that burn communities is a wind event with fire in it. And within that wind event with fire in it, you have embers, and you have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of embers per, acre raining down, trying to find vulnerabilities. Yeah. And those embers are turning into flame. And if they turn into flame next to in a fence that's connected to a house, then the house is going to ignite. Or if they get into the attic through venting that's not fine enough to prevent their entry, then they can find maybe some paper or some stuff stored in your attic and ignite that, right? And it's a physics question. And actually, while we have a lot of values we want, let's say wood products from forests or hiking or other things, what we do on natural landscapes, we do for those values, right? And what we do for the built environment is very local to the home. So we're talking about the home ignition zone, which in California is referred to as zone 0. But it's just like that first 0 to 5 feet where ember can become flame and your house can get on fire, right? So many homes, the mechanism is they're burning well after the fire's gone, right? The bark mulch is smoldering for 2-3 days. And the fire service is so overwhelmed that they can't respond to every home, and that bark mulch will ignite your house. So Jack Cohen did an amazing thing for us, which is he gave people this mechanism revelation, right? And that creates self-persuasion for folks. People need to realize that they have agency, and the way that they realize they have agency is by realizing the problem with the built environment is not out in the wildlands. It's not out in the forest or the grasslands. It's local to their home, local to their neighborhood, to their block, to their community, right? And so people don't want to be told the conclusion. They need to be respected and sort of discover that themselves. So like the Insurance Institute test facility where they have the duplex and they shoot embers out, if they let us film that, and people watch that and go, oh my gosh, I actually can do something about this, right? It's not government's responsibility. It's annoying. It's mine, So like they have to do it. But I think that there is a perception that people act on information, and really what they're acting on is identity, timing, social cues, and their perceived agency. And so I really saw this both with the wildlife and time-lapse photography that got people to go, oh, a burn forest isn't destroyed. Oh, there's beauty in the burn. And then they saw this Jack Cohen stuff and they were like, oh wow. I thought the problem was somewhere else. Actually, the problem is something I can do something about. So you got to show what works.
I totally agree with you, but that we can show them information all day, but especially like in Los Angeles, I mean, it's the people who are protesting any of these zone 0 are from the neighboring town of Brentwood. Do you know? And I was just in Brentwood driving around and I was like, this is not to your best interest, and so getting them, I actually went and addressed a group of awesome, really great women who have an investment circle essentially. And I did that specifically because I also wanted to talk to them about this aspect of it and sort of get them to hear that they do have agency. It's not just a failure of government. And I think that that's one of the issues in the LA fires on the Palisades side is because there were failures of government, it became like that's the only issue and we don't have to change. And there's some people who are willing to change, just not as many as you might hope as they rebuild.
Yeah, so we've been doing stories from Altadena. We just got asked to do some in Ventura, and I'm familiar with the opposition in certain communities in Southern California to Zone 0 and the perception that it means you can't have any vegetation.
Right.
And you can't have trees. The perception is not the reality. But
it's not the reality.
And I just was in Grass Valley, Nevada City, in Northern California, in Sonoma, with folks who, they've seen a Jack Cohen video and they've been like, oh gosh, I can do things. And some of them have plants in Zone 0. Some of them have super beautiful wildfire prepared yards that have fire reluctant plants in them. You don't have to sacrifice beauty. There's a perception that I think is being perpetuated by some opponents to statewide code that, you have to have a prison yard around your house.
Yeah.
You don't. You can have a cool, sexy place that, you want to invite people over to have a mojito. But I also think there's a cultural difference. I'm not saying it's universal between folks in Brentwood or Bel Air and Altadena, but I think the folks in Altadena that we've met that are doing the things are just, they kind of have a different attitude of their entitlement towards government services and to be seen and heard. They're just more just like, we just went through it. Let's figure this out. Let's solve it. There's a whole bunch of, NASA Jet Propulsion Lab engineers over there as well.
Yeah. We do a lot of work at JPL. We love them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a little bit of a difference culturally. It's shocking to drive up Mandeville Canyon and see homes enveloped in highly flammable green gas can shrubs known as juniper or Italian cypress. Or like
God.
up into their eaves. And it's cringe. It makes me cringe because I will never see the world the same because I'm fully a Jackalite. I am a Jack Cohen. I've learned so much from him. I've been so curious to understand. But I will say, like, I have shrubs in zone 0 and not shrubs. I have plants in zone 0. They're highly maintained. They are very fire reluctant. And they will not sustain combustion in a dangerous way. So if you look at Jack Cohen's science, it doesn't say no plants in zone 0. It just says nothing that will sustain combustion in a dangerous way. So the new rules that are being considered for the April meeting coming up, some of the options do allow plants. I think the insurance industry is just nervous about that because people will not maintain them, right?
Yeah.
You take a juniper and you push the green to the side and you look in there and it's full of fine stuff and those things burn at 800 degrees and crack your windows. So they don't want that.
We just should not
stuff.
have juniper. Like, it's okay. Like, why can't we just not have juniper or Italian cypress unless it's far away from the house? If you want to catch embers in your Italians, my mom has 5 next to her house and she does not believe me that this is a very bad idea. And
she could turn them into poodle bushes. I mean, but nobody likes the poodle bush juniper. I mean, maybe some people do, but I think they're pretty goofy looking. They're very Dr. Seussian. But the other thing is lavender. I mean, lavender is very oily. I won't name names, but I was just at someone who's a very knowledgeable fire person who has a very overgrown lavender, and I gave him a talking to about it. It's work, right? So Jack says, if you want that tree, be prepared to work for it, right? It's going to drop needles. And you can even have an ice plant that's not a plant that generally burns, but it drops a bunch of stuff. So if you want the beauty, move it a little bit away from your house, get your windows back, look out at it versus dressing your house in flammable material that's unmaintained. I think the stories that we're doing now for Fire Safe People TV on YouTube are like, the idea is I want to be like Alice. I want to be like Abigail from Altadena. I want to be like Susie Cummings from Cloverdale, California, who's like this awesome retired school teacher who we show up at her house. She's like, welcome to Susie's Firewise Workshop. And she went in her house. In her house was like all the fine mesh laid out because her neighbors are all on fixed incomes. Retirement community. They couldn't afford expensive retrofits. So she went and bought a bunch of mesh. She resells it to her neighbors at cost. She cuts it to size to fit. She delivers it, and she found a handyman to install it. And so what she overcame was both helping people have the mechanism revelation, but just finding a way to get people started on their journey and respecting them wherever they are, and however frustrating it might be with your mom that she has green gas cans surrounding her house. What Susie did was, if people had that, she didn't say, oh, that plant is going to burn your house. What she said was, you're going to have a really hard time escaping if that plant is on fire. And so she flips the script on them. And it's been really interesting hearing how people are figuring out how to inspire homeowner action. But the reason I turned to film is I think show, not tell. I think show, not tell works, right? And really trying to respect the viewer on whatever their journey is. And giving them things that they can see themselves in it.
Hi there, can you tell us your name and what you're doing here at Altadena Rebuild?
Yeah, so my name is Francis, and I'm here with CARES, the Center for Applied Ecological Remediation. So we're a nonprofit organization that uses native plants and fungi to remediate soil of contaminations.
Why do you think this is a good idea?
So a lot of our research indicates that we could use native plants, which is great for the environment, and fungus to remediate contamination of the soil. So it's a natural, earth-friendly way to heal the soil.
The typical way is just dig deeper, scoop it up, and let it grow back on its own, right?
Yep.
That's a typical way. So what's different?
Yeah, so what we're doing is so when you scrape and move, you're just basically scraping the contaminants and you're just offsetting it to a different site where those contaminants are just going to live over there. The wind can blow them around in that area. Who knows where they're going? So what we're doing is looking at like long-term effects, right? So you can see we have a vacant area right here, and then once we start bioremediating with plants, you can see we have the plant density cover and then continuous healing of the soil. So this wind, anything can start blowing this around. You can have soil erosion, but here we're creating a living environment that's continuously healing the soil.
So, especially for owners that have pets, that have kids that play in the soil, why did you tell them this is important?
Yeah, so this is very important because you want to create a safe environment where you're living, where you're playing and spending time with your family. So by doing bioremediation, it's a nature-based solution using kind of like these nature's little cleanup crew to do the work. Yeah, funguses are known as like nature's decomposers. So they break down a lot of stuff, including contaminants.
So how would someone who has had the Army Corps of Engineers scrape their lot, they think they're okay, how could they find you and why should they?
Yeah, so you would go to our website, which is caearth.com, and reach out to us. And what we will do first is we will go out and collect soil samples just to see what's present in the soil, what contaminants are there. Because a lot of times, even with soil scraping, it depends on the depth and the layer of how much these contaminants go down. So if it's just the top layer, you still might have contaminants underneath. So the first thing we do is we're going to test the soil, see what's present. Based on those results, we're going to put together the funguses and the plants together, utilize them to remediate that area.
And then you put the fungus down, and how long does it take before you feel like something's better?
So it depends on like the levels of contamination and the different contaminants that we're working with. But I think even up to like the first 3 months, you'll start to see some of these plants and microbes break down these contaminants.
So how much would it cost a homeowner?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure on that one. As a nonprofit organization, we work with a lot of grants. So we get a lot of funding through the state and different partner organizations. So we try to be as low cost or as community centered as we can.
All right. So Francis, thank you for reminding us that fantastic fungi is there to help us.
That's right. Fantastic fungi. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Hi there. Can you tell me who you are and what your desk is about?
Hi, my name is Crystal, and I'm with the Foothill Catalog Foundation, and we are a nonprofit architectural firm. What we do is we produce free of fruit home in the LA County area, and actually we're expanding to LA City as well. And with our catalog, free of fruit homes, we have almost 40 free of fruit homes now. Amazing. And what this catalog offers is an acceleration of rebuilding for the Altadenian and Palisades for that matter, to really cut down the rebuild requirements, effort that is required for a very, very reasonable cost.
I am looking at your displays, Crystal. I feel like crying because they're so cute. They're named the Lexington, the Elizabeth, the Solana. Here's a book of how many did you say, 40?
Close to 40 now.
And so what happens? Why would I do this? Historically, does this make a difference?
Of course, it made a huge difference. First of all, it brings hope to the homeowners because homeowners now see there's a path forward. With these homes, you have a lot of choices, and the choices really reflect the architectural characteristic and the history of the Altadena community. And so when homeowners sees this, they can actually feel the physical aspect of the home. They actually see that there is a milestone that they can achieve, and they actually feel like there's a hope to achieve this because the cost is so reasonable.
Because you sort of made it a formula.
Yes.
You choose from, it's like shopping in a catalog for a home.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
It's like a Sears catalog way back when, and that's the idea. And we have built a relationship, and we work the process with the local jurisdiction to get these pre-approved homes to quickly get through the pipeline so that we can produce these beautiful homes for our homeowners.
And now tell me, I just remodeled my house in the Palisades, but I love what you've chosen here. What is this? What does the interior mean here?
Yeah, so these are our interior packages, and it's really meant to give homeowners a head start in terms of the choices that homeowners can choose. Because oftentimes you choose a home and the interior may be forgotten, or it could be overwhelming when homeowners get to this point. So this is just to give homeowners a head start, an idea, and of course they can pick and choose and put together their own packages as well. So these are what we call our interior packages.
And also they're in this style of what you might have gotten in a bungalow in Altadena. Right?
Exactly. They're different style that matches the different characteristic of the home. And there's also, homeowners can have slight variation if they want to, depending on their preference.
Also, you don't have to hire an interior designer really, which is an expense that people really don't want to have.
Right.
Well, Crystal, where do we find you?
So we're at foothillcatalog.org. You can find our catalog, complete catalog of almost 40 homes there as well. But come visit at Day One Trade Show too.
All right. Thank you, Crystal. We're very excited. I want a home in Altadena now.
I think when you talk about the mesh in particular, for people who are not familiar, because our audience is going to be people who've actually been through disasters, or have recently gone through it, or they're just curious about it at the same time. But because it's all a game of ember cast, so much of it. So can you talk about the role of mesh and how accessible this is in order to make your home far safer?
Yeah. So, it's a physics game, right? And so the thing that you see if you look at footage, and I have way too much footage from all these fires, but what you see is the fire's coming out of the wildlands, and it's burning in trees or grasslands. Actually, most home loss occurs in grasslands, 80%, not in forested landscapes. People think it's a wall of flames, but actually it's not really a wall of flames. Sometimes the fire's crowning out, but in the wind-driven ones, it's more horizontal. And so you got a 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 mile an hour wind, sometimes gusts of 100. And it's just basically driving. Oftentimes embers are like bark from trees that are burning. So the bits are sometimes smaller than a 1/4 inch. So if your house has a vented attic, right, or a vented crawl space, it typically came with 1/4 inch mesh. And so embers can get driven in to that. And on the mountain fire in Oxnard in Ventura County, we have footage of no vegetation around houses on fire and the houses burning from the inside out because embers are getting into the attic. And then sometimes they're not finding anything that's flammable and that nothing happens. But oftentimes people have stuff stored in there, or they might have old newsprint type installation that's highly flammable, and it's all dried out. And the fire's off to the races. So that's a thing that's really easy and low cost to do. There's products that are like flame resistant vents, but if you have flame contact with your eaves, you've got other problems. So the wildfire defense mesh is the one that I recommend. It's up to between an 1/8 or a 1/16, and no embers will get in to your crawl or your attic. And that's one of the biggest vulnerabilities. And then the rest of them are just essentially wildfire gardening around your house instead of home hardening. They're not really modifying the structure other than like if you have connected fence, removing that last 5 feet and breaking that bridge of fire from the fence to your house and just replacing it. So like Susie had a system where she just, on red flag days, she just props open her gate instead of removing
Oh, interesting.
the gate. She's really smart. And then other people just put in a metal section and they got somebody to fabricate, or they bought pre-made really cool gates. And I've seen them in Paradise as well
Okay.
that Jen has done.
This makes me insane, though, because I don't know why the big companies are so far behind on requesting metal gates. They're not that easy to find. They're agricultural gates. Like, that's super easy if you have a farm. But metal gates are too expensive, or they have wood in between. They have a metal frame if they're mass produced, and wood in between. And like, I have to change out mine, and I am like, okay, do I have one fabricated? But that's like a point of like privilege. Like, people, like, I wish that they were more accessible and they were as easy to find, if not easier, than wood fencing, wood gates. It's been a huge frustration for me. The other thing is that I've been working in this space for like 8.5 years, right? So you'd think that I would know that mesh, that I didn't have to make my own vent covers, but I didn't know that. So I measured all of them, and I have a very standard 1957 ranch track home, right? And I went to my Friedman's, which is a locally owned hardware store, and I was all ready with my measurements, like this. I'm going to buy the mesh, and I'm going to do this. And then I turned around, and they had standard ones for $5. They had the right mesh.
Oh,
each.
good. Well, it depends on the house. It's interesting going to these different. So Susie got white and she got black because some of the houses that were white, and she offered this. We walked with her to another guy, Kip, who's 96 years old, and she brought him his mesh, and Kip had just recently been remarried at 95.
Wow.
He was so sweet. And he was like, I'd like the white one because his house is white and his mesh is white. So, it can be very low cost to do a very basic thing that can greatly increase the odds of survival. It's so fascinating, like with the Reavers in Altadena. This is a JPL moon engineer and his wife, who's a doctor, and Rich and Alexis were talking about Rich returned 16 hours after the fire, and all the bark mulch around his house was smoldering and burning. And he put 95 buckets of water, and the water was boiling. And he was like, if I hadn't returned that bark mulch, the fire was gone, but the bark mulch was still burning. So just moving the bark mulch away, you can do like river rocks and maybe some pavers. You can do gravel, but you can mix it up so it's not like visually monolithic.
Well, and a lot of people think it does
cost money.
It does, and there will be. I think there's good legislation right now in the state of California anyway to reimburse for some of those costs, which would be great because we're paying for it anyway. As the public taxpayers are paying all these costs anyway as the result of the mega fires. So I'm very supportive of that. Really sad about the Inflation Reduction Act removing so many of the other parts that would be quite helpful for electrification and making it more financially accessible. But I think that there's also a misperception that the rest of your landscaping has to then also be like desert, or that it has to be even drought resistant, because it actually doesn't have to be that. And so you can choose your own adventure in that case. And then I try to remind people that, like, I'm 5'10". It's less than a me, that's what we're asking for. It's like shoulders down, right? It's really not an overwhelming amount of space. And it doesn't mean at all you can't have your favorite plants. Even you shouldn't have juniper. It was just outlaw juniper. But you can make it beautiful. Like, you can have lawn if you want to away from your house, all of those things. Can you also talk about the number of people who've been told that as long as you water your plants, they're not going to burn right up against your house?
Yes. Well, what these downslope wind events are, Santa Ana's Diablos in Oregon, east winds, right? These Chinooks in Colorado, they're basically giant hair dryers. So within which there's a 3-dimensional ember storm coming at you. So they're pre-drying out all the vegetation in the path of that ember storm. And so the other thing is, sure, you could have a well-watered plant, but if it's got a bunch of dead material in it, right, that's hidden inside of it, the thing could be well alive, but it sheds a lot. So you have to stay on that. But particular plants are less fire reluctant. So it could be very well maintained, well watered, and it could dry out. And it could, if it's very large and next to your house, sustain combustion enough that it could ignite your siding or the assembly, right? That's what you're trying to prevent. So if you kept it really small or smaller and you made sure to remove all the dead material, like we do at our house, then I'm not worried about any of the plants that I have in zone 0 because I'm on top of them. Or really, Indra mostly is on top of them. She's mercenary about it, right? But you have to stay on top of it. So it is not true, and it has not been shown that plants, will be acting as ember shields or trapping embers, that kind of thing. Now, embers are kind of like drifting snow, Jen. So if they're, have you ever seen like a snow break in Wyoming? You're driving and then the snow gathers on the other side.
I have not seen that.
There's some of these eddy effects that do occur. So some of these stories that are being told around plants acting as traps or ember catchments are coming from some things. But what we see in Mandeville Canyon is just frightening, right? In terms of the amount of vegetation there. And it could be well watered, well maintained, but you're talking hedges that are 16 feet, 18 feet, 20 feet. And I went and looked in some of them and they're green, but they're full of dead stuff. So I would be very concerned living in there. And frankly, I wouldn't want to, because I don't think the people that living there have a really good chance of controlling their destiny when their neighbors are enveloped in shrubs. And that means the odds that one house or several houses will ignite overwhelm fire suppression and start to ignite other houses. That's the thing you're trying to avoid, is it's collective ignition resistance, not sole ignition resistance for your house, because the thing that's burning most houses is the neighboring house on fire.
I think that's one of the things that is both our greatest opportunity, but also our greatest barrier, which is that it is by the very nature, just like recovery, is a group project. It has to be in community for us to get it right. And there are certain people, even in like Berkeley, I'm sure you're aware that the Ember Ordinance is, even though they have, from 1992, like some familiarity with Oakland Hills fires, those sorts of things. But there's been a lot of resistance to, well, this is my land, my property. You cannot tell me what I can do with it. And then that what you do affects your neighbors. But it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's totally right. I mean, the social science research goes from general abstraction around people's understanding and the dominant narratives around fire to some really amazing stuff that's been done recently that I've gotten my hands on of thousands of people specifically around wildfire mitigation. And once people start to feel like it's part of the identity of the neighborhood and you get 40 to 50% participation, then you start to get this snowballing effect of people going, oh no, I'm falling behind. I'm not keeping up with my neighbors. So I think just like yard signs saying, ask me how to not burn your house down, or like getting pretty fresh, right? A bit of gallows humor. Like we were talking to somebody today in Ventura, and they do a whole presentation about how I burned my house down. And it's really going to be funny, I think, because they lost their house in the Thomas fire and they're willing to go there, right? That they did it to themselves and own that they could have known better, could have taken action and didn't. And I just thought it was so refreshing that they were willing to go there. But imagine a neighborhood where 50% of the people have a sign outside that says, I'm wildfire prepared, ask me how. And then what people just need to be like, get a specific action versus be prepared. They need to be like, okay, do your vent first. That's easy. Or just get people started, and that capability piece inspires action. And it is definitely a community effort. We need to make it like, you and I've talked about this, but like, we need to make it like cigarette smoking and secondhand smoke, super uncool, and make it cool to do the things, and feature like Jen has done recently in Rebuild Paradise.
Jen Goodlin.
Stylish Jen Goodlin, featuring stylish wildfire prepared homes. Part of the reason I tried to pitch, I did pitch Jonathan Scott from the Scott Brothers on a wildfire makeover show. We need it local, and we need it, we need it visible.
And we need to make it accessible accessible. We need to make it a little sexier, a little more charming, because the messaging has been rough. It hasn't landed very well. This just when you're strictly on science and you can't finger wag your way through this, it's just not going to work. But I think the approach of like, oh, look, okay, now if you can get momentum going in a neighborhood, that's really helpful. I often wish there were swarms of like AmeriCorps volunteers who would come into a neighborhood like mine, which has, I don't know, probably 120 homes, and they could do just the simple things just to show people like how to start the journey. And then it wouldn't feel so overwhelming, because I think that, we're all experiencing it all the time. It's just that people are so overwhelmed by it. And I because I work in recovery too, I'm very sensitive for anybody. I could never go and tell people like, here's how you burned your house down. Like that would never land in our messaging at all. But I'm trying to get them to say, okay, fire is going to happen again. Since it's going to happen again, you actually do have agency, and this terrible thing has just been done to you. And here's something you can do for you on the other end that also helps your entire neighborhood. Since you suffered so much together, you can actually rebuild in a way that mitigates the chance of that kind of damage occurring again, because fire is going to come back.
Yep. And I've been trying Humor for Hazards. I don't know if you've seen any of it, but I did in music and song, because I had folks that are like on the front lines doing inspections that I've gotten to know through being on the road with Elemental Reimagine Wildfire. I've gotten to know people across the West, and they talk to me and they share their frustrations. And, we have these private conversations around what's working, what's not working, that are different than, the public presentation around their program. And sometimes they're like, I'm ready to get pissed off at people. And I'm like, well, how about we take one step back from that and try some humor, and it may or may not land. And so I recently made a thing. I took the Cops song, Bad Boys, What You Gonna Do? And I changed it to Embers, Embers, What You Gonna Do? What You Gonna Do before they come for you? And I had a reggae artist sing it, and I had an Italian composer do the backing track. So it's all original. And I've got, footage, and I actually had the reggae artist record it in his studio. So I got a music video of him singing it. And I already know that like the folks on the front lines are playing it, and it's put a bounce in their step, and that's enough for me. But I want to keep going with that. Like I've developed this series that's not public yet, but this might be good for your mom, which is a house sitting in a psychiatrist's chair, talking to the psychiatrist about their negligent owner dressing them in too many shrubs. And that the house is going to be left behind when fire comes and abandoned. So it's very, New Yorker style. And I think that like more of this, so for Grass Valley in Nevada City, we're looking at developing a Bridgerton, home hardening, racy message with people in Victorian era clothing. Right. And I think it's the normal one is get your go bag, prepare, mitigate, right? And from officialdom, and does a very eat your vegetables message, and folks aren't really they're tired of hearing it. So we got to figure out how to crack the code on delivering the vegetables in ways that people don't think they're being told to eat their vegetables, and in ways they can see themselves in it. And bring some of the fun to it, I think, and like look at what's like native to YouTube, which are like these mesmerizing power washing videos. Or
I love those so much.
We need
relaxing.
Right. Or like, the like, I'll clean your lawn up. And so I think those things should inspire those of us that want to incorporate, a wildfire preparedness message, just like, there's a good number of people, Jen Goodlin included, who really love their gardens, right? And maybe that's 20 to 25% of people that are out there that really want to put in that work. And so they should have, firescaping TV that brings a gardener's message and a love of plants and pollinators with a fire reluctant lens and you could have two patches of vegetation, but then you can have a path in between so that if one of them is burning, it doesn't transfer to the other one or something. And, there were people when we were out on the road recently shooting that were definitely in that space, and they were super fun, and what they were doing was beautiful. And so, I think that we've led too much with a be prepared message that's generic and not brought enough fun to it. And I'm not, but I've been part of that.
Well, and, when I do push back on some of the official messaging or mention that it's just too it's like a stomach ache instead of an opportunity. And then I've actually been on meetings where I hear, well, people just don't want to do it. That's they just don't want to do it. I'm like, but that's not where we can end this conversation. It's like, how do we normalize it? Just like I like to use indoor toilets is my, favorite metaphor or analogy. I don't know if it's a metaphor. I guess yes, it is. That, people thought that was disgusting, that we would have toilets indoors for the longest time. And they thought, well, this is expensive. It's impractical. It's disgusting. And until we had a major cholera and typhoid outbreak in America, it did not become normalized and the federal government didn't get involved. But we had to have a public health crisis. And now you wouldn't even go look at a house necessarily. I mean, you live in Oregon, so you might. But, you guys are a little more rugged there sometimes. But where they didn't have a bathroom. And in fact, it's a feature that can sell a home, though. It can be it's one of those primary things that people really love is a beautiful bathroom, a beautiful kitchen. And having those things is normalized. And we can normalize being multi-peril prepared. I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't do that. But we do have to give it a beauty bonus. Totally here for that. And we can combine ourselves with the engineers that figure this out, because thank God for engineers, but then those of people like you who can deliver a message that might land a lot better in a more cozy way that feels much more accessible. Because you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about why is this message not landing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this piece that you brought up of people getting upset or caught up around the axle on the folks that are just stubborn and don't want to do anything and thinking that's all of them. It's the research shows it's really less than 20%. And there's actually even a way to engage the uninformed, disengaged. I think it's incorrect to say people don't appreciate the risk and we just need to scare them. Both of those things are untrue. That doesn't work. The research tells us there's a certain segment, fairly substantial cost is an issue. The other ones, they're getting conflicting information about what they do and they don't know where to start. They need very simple, here's where you start. Some people are very collaborative and they want to go next level. So there's very specific segments. And again, we have to respect and be patient, as hard as it might be, and engage with them. But I love the malodorous vapors of the Victorian era, and we didn't want the poo inside. And now, of course, people aren't really that comfortable pooing outside.
No.
Some of us are.
That's why I don't camp at all. I'm not doing it. You can't make me.
It's so great. I love pooing outside. But anyway, I'm one of those. See, I grew up on a farm, So
I did too. It's probably why I don't like that. I don't like.
I recently Keegan took me over to his buddy Sean Penn's house, and we were over there, and I actually went outside in the backyard.
Love how
you
just dropped that, by the way, just casually dropped
pee
that.
in his backyard, and he was like, "What were you doing outside?" I was like, "Taking a pee. I grew up on a farm." He's like, "Cool." So it's not that abnormal, but anyway, the idea that this Victorian era shift was a massive cultural shift, and I think this is a similar massive cultural shift of how we dress up our houses and how we present our houses. But the other piece that I thought was really interesting was we met with this couple in Sonoma outside of Santa Rosa. I think they were right out of Fulton, and their name is Stephanie and Chris. And every time they did a project, they wanted to get double benefit. So they would do a fire project that would also bring them joy. And I think that double benefit piece, right? People are like, oh, I'd rather have a new kitchen. I'd rather have a new bathroom. That'll bring me more joy. But like Stephanie and Chris, like they did this whole beautiful rock retaining wall and they left space for plants, right? They did a new pathway and they curved it and edged it. And then they put in different plants and they got their windows back so they could like look out and get their views. So I think that like, instead of a just be prepared, deliver a double benefit message, right? Really think about the archetypes that are out there, if you will, of what are the barriers for people and deliver things to them. And I think we can get
I think that's
there.
one of the things Jen is very good at in Paradise too, is that she actually asks like, okay, well, what's the barrier to getting people insured? And they've already done these other things. And it turns out it was the 0 to 5. And once people understood that, sure, they might have to move their, 5-year-old, because a lot of these people, the homes were gone. They might have to move their landscaping out 5 feet, but then they could save $14,000 a year. And all of a sudden it became worth it to them. When they also heard from the insurance company, it's the only place where we've seen progress on insurance companies. And now I think she's brought like 5 up there. And she's doing a project for us right now with Valerie Brown to really try to make some of these things more accessible. Like a kit, almost like a toolkit, but we're all trying to do that. I think it's actually in one way or another, like we're going to get to the other side of this, but it does take people like Jen who also are, plain spoken, like really articulate, but is very like non-judgmental. It's not that at all. I think the way she delivers the message is also really, really effective because it's warm.
Yeah, I think exactly. She is approaching people with curiosity and not judgment, and curiosity builds relationship. And it's taken me some time to get to that place personally because I had a lot of, sort of very strong opinions expressed by my parents or mostly my mom about people. And just learning that doesn't really help build relationship. And I think it's really fascinating to hear her story of what she's done in terms of people are doing like a wildfire prepared home and are they getting rewarded by the insurance industry? And they weren't. And she was like, this is not going to work. So she went out and is trying to solve that problem and said, I want you all to come to my community and put eyeballs on the property and see that these are much more insurable than other ones that you have. And she relates that they did come and they were like, I want to insure that one, and that one. And what she said today was awesome. I talked to her earlier today. She said that people equate the gravel and available rock that we make available for Zone 0 with insurance. They see that as gravel equals insurability.
Yep.
And that's the cultural change in an identity. And like she's nailed that, right? And I think doing things of like, it's really hard to do storytelling around the insurance piece. I'm working on it, but just because of this challenge of if I do the things, will I be rewarded? But people should know they can get a little bit. If they do all the things, they can write to their insurance company and say, I should get some credit. It's not equivalent to what they did. But the main thing is they have a hope of maybe getting off the FAIR plan. A hope, not a promise.
Right.
And then they also have a much greater odds of keeping their insurance if they're not on the FAIR plan, right? If they do the things.
Or she's moved people off the FAIR plan in Paradise.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge win. That's the only place I think that we've ever seen that happen at all. And also by having the insurance like moves slower, that industry moves slower than government. Like people don't necessarily, they're very, very conservative industry. But they also recognize more and more over the last couple of years, especially, and I think LA was really a tipping point for a lot of them, that they do have to actually engage in community more and that they can come out the other side with better outcomes and, fewer massive disasters, one hopes, on the other side. But I think that I like the fact that that Jen took it as an empowerment moment because of her curiosity, though, and that the innovation came from a very rural community that had been leveled for sure. But I love that too, because a lot of our good innovations are coming from rural communities, but this one in particular can game change. And we've taken her to LA 3 times. We took her to Maui. So we're really trying to introduce her, to other communities like deeply, so that people can see that they do have agency. They can actually take this problem that seems insurmountable and actually move it along in a way that has material benefits for them.
I had 2 other things before we get to the end of the session here, but I had 2 things. One is last year I shot a film for NASA and the Department of Defense and the Forest Service on their burn program, and they burn more land than any agency in the entire United States, hundreds of thousands of acres on military land. And they do it to protect their assets, to facilitate training, to manage fire behavior. It's really fascinating. And what we're seeing is also a technology that's going to enable more human intelligence and action on the landscape. So one of the things I got to do as a result of making Elemental was I got to meet folks at NASA, present the film at the White House, and go to Congress and screen the film. And then I met Dr. Lori Moore Merrill, who's fantastic, from the U.S. Fire Administration, and is now working at Fire Safety Research Institute, and look at technology and how technology can help us. And they're developing now technology that can see fire in much smaller, finer scale, and particularly fast fire. It's still in development, both in satellites, but also in high altitude stuff. So that film's coming out pretty soon. We're still in post-production, but we're probably a couple months out from completion. That's a feature film. And I just think it's really fascinating that, a country worth defending is a country worth burning. And that piece we were talking about earlier of how are we making peace with fire? How are we using fire as a tool? That the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force are using fire as a tool for land management, but also for protecting the installation. And that film is coming out. So I just wanted to share that.
Have they always done that? Or is it after? Because I know I think it was during the CZU Lightning Complex fires. I know that there's a top secret Lockheed facility in Santa Cruz. And that was definitely, there was a fire up there. And I don't know what they do up there, because I'm not top secret.
The heavy use of fire is mostly in the Southeast United States, but there's some in Washington State on Fort Joint Base Lewis McChord. There's definitely some in California, but the bulk of it is in the Southeast, but a lot more of the installations are becoming interested in it. It's something that's been going on for 2 decades, and it's not been well documented.
Interesting.
And I made Elemental, and I was at a conference presenting it, and this guy came up to me and he was like, "Hey, I'm Kevin. I work with the military, with the Department of Defense. And if, you made an amazing film, if you want to come see what we do someday, I'd love to have you." And so I spent 2 years researching it. I was like, wow, there's a really interesting story here. So I put together a proposal and I went and filmed that last year. And it's really, I think, an interesting way for people to learn more about how fire can be used for, good and for land management, but also, what we can do. Like if the military is doing this to protect its installations, there's a serious there. And I think that helps again with mechanism revelation. And the second piece that I wanted to share is this piece we're talking about is how do you give tools to homeowners, right? What do they need? Well, they need a personal place-based assessment for their house. They need to be seen and heard at their house, at their place, in their community. But I got introduced to Niantic Spatial, the folks that made Pokemon Go. And
that was unexpected.
Yeah, we're talking about, can we build a thing where I can hold up my phone, scan my house, and then watch a 3-dimensional ember storm interact with my house. And does it fail or does it burn? No, excuse me, does it survive or does it burn, right? and then I could mitigate it, and then I could scan it again, and I could see what would happen. And the tools.
Could they use like the, I know that VR, I like VR, but I can see that it's not the future at all. I don't think so, but the augmented reality certainly is in the specs and those sorts of things. And so I love this idea that you could do that, because then that would also give you agency, and it helps people so much to visualize it. Because my terrible idea was I wanted people to put on a VR headset in their neighborhood and turn to their house and see what it would look like if it were all gone, and also to have a first person understanding of what it's like to experience a mega fire. Because when you're in the moment, and people think, oh, I can open my garage, or I can do all of these things in sequence, but you're like, could you do it if you had 90 seconds to leave in a major firestorm, right? Like a major wind event at the same time with embers everywhere. People don't, and I was probably taking the mean way to go. So this is probably much better.
Yeah, I think but you're on to the same thing, right? Which is let people experience it, because one of the things that's really upsetting in LA is all the finger pointing against the fire services or the water system. Did the water system fail, or did the community fail to adapt to receive fire? And I would say it's the latter. Did the fire services fail in terms of fire response? I'd say the community failed to prepare, and too many houses were on fire. I mean, the water system collapsed because gravity works, and once homes burn, the water has nowhere to go, and it's basically a fountain in a toxic waste hole. And I'm going to be very blunt about that. And I think
here we go.
I just struggle with that piece of like, people don't really understand the intensity of conflagration, and my fierceness comes out also when you see these silver bullet technologies that people say, oh, we have this new technology, we're going to solve conflagration. And I'm like, you're not going to deny physics, you're not going to deny natural realities, and your solution isn't going to work in an 80-mile-an-hour wind event. So your idea to like taking people into that visibly so they fully appreciate the intensity of that event is where my head always goes when people say, oh, I have the solution to that, or government failed us. There were some mistakes that happened with the management.
To be clear, there were mistakes. Mistakes were made in LA, including the original fire. And so we are not going to not say that wasn't true. And also the lack of prepositioning, like there was a naivete that I feel happened in the fire department or with the leadership for sure, that like wishful thinking, like, sure, we've had so many of these before, but it won't happen this time. So just to be clear, totally agree with that side of it. So I don't want to take that from the people who were so hugely harmed by it. Yeah. But it doesn't mean we have to be able to, in this era of multiple perils especially, we have to be able to hold both and. We have to say, fire good, also bad. Yes, government failures, but also we have a system that was completely not set up. Like our fire hydrants were not set up for mega fires. They're set up for a house fire, for like a one-off. Not the entire system collapses because all those water systems are not sectioned. They don't have microgrids for them. You can do that. That's what Lahaina is doing in their rebuild. They are microgridding, the separating the hydrants from the homes so that they have that ability to do it. But that's not when they set up the entire hydrant system in this country. That was not a thought that we would have these major urban conflagration episodes. They just didn't think in that way because they hadn't seen it in that way as a crisis. Yeah. Also, if you're in a suburb, do not think about getting a sprinkler on the top of your house, because if all the water goes down, if you're in a rural area, great. But if all the water system goes down, where are you going to get the water from for your expensive sprinklers on top of your house? That's my editorial. Go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there, and I know that there's folks that are listening to your podcast that have lost everything in fire and are working on rebuilding, and I don't want to understate the pain and loss and feelings that people have. I have come to see firefighters as fire survivors, and I have gotten to know Jesse Alexander, who responded to the campfire, and every time after conflagration we check in and talk, and almost everybody that he responded to the campfire is not firefighting anymore for various very painful reasons that I'd rather not talk about in any great detail. But it's, they're responding and they're breathing in the burned homes, and they're not surviving that afterwards. But the piece of like the water system is, our expectations are unreasonable about fire response, and our expectations are unreasonable about the water system. The water systems are built to provide us drinking water. And if we're going to go 10x on that water system and try to overcome gravity in a failing system, right, then it's going to cost us more than probably 10x, because we got to treat all that water for drinking. It's not just a fire water system. It is a drinking water system primarily, that is also available to put out a couple house fires, right? That's what it's built for. So fundamentally, the premise of some of the commentary around the water system failing just don't understand what the water system is for. And, if you do the math on all these conflagrations, it's one firefighter per 17 homes. And they had a double shift in LA County. I don't know what they did for LA City, but I know what LA County did, and I know what the Forest Service did. I know Chief Garcia had his people staged, right? It's really hard to pre-position when you don't know where the ignition's going to be, and when the wind event is covering a huge area. So yes, we can pre-position. Yes, we can double shift, but the people making those decisions are on the hook if fire doesn't come for paying that bill. It's a real challenging place to be in. And I think that ultimately the reason I get fierce about these things is because I don't want communities to burn, and I want people to help firefighters get their sleep back by doing the things before fire comes, right? And if they do the things before fire comes, then the available resources can match the demand, because there'll be less houses on fire at any one time. And that's where we have to get, because, whether it's a very localized wind event, it's still covering a fairly large area. And there was tens of thousands of homes in that fire's path, right? And I've done the math on how many firefighters were available, and it's never enough. And so we can't rely in the wind events with fire in it on fire suppression.
It's also, the Eaton fire was the first time that two of my CAL FIRE friends, who don't usually call me during an event, but called. And it was almost like therapy for a minute, because what they needed to say was, then these people were not, they weren't like, we're going to call Jen. They separately called and said, this is literally the scariest fire I've ever seen. And they are from the most experienced CAL FIRE unit in the entire state. And CAL FIRE is the most elite firefighting agency in the world. And so they have been in all of these fires. They've done all the mutual aid. And the Eaton fire for them was the scariest piece of it. Because you kind of know where the wind's going to go. But after a while, like, fire will create its own weather too. And in the Palisades, like, it blew all the way down to the ocean. And then it blew it all the way back, and then took out even more homes. And you can't fight that. You can't predict that. I mean, in certain parts you can, but for the most part you cannot, which means that we have to do our own side of it. And also firefighters should not be expected to go any more above and beyond what they're doing now. Like, we can't put them in mortal danger, because we have this idea. I went on a ride along in Beverly Hills a couple of years ago, and everybody has gates, metal gates, even in the smaller homes. And I'm like, what are you going to do, like, in a fire? And the person touring me around is like, oh, well, I'm not going to name him just to be polite. He said, we've got keys, universal keys for all of them. And I'm like, how are you going to do that in a mega fire, though? Like, you can't actually count on that. You have to be able, like, your gates need to be open. There are certain things that you have to do. We know so many people, unfortunately, who can't, it gets de-energized. They don't have a backup on their gate. They crawl out to save themselves over the gate, but they can't carry, a relative who's disabled. We've seen that, or their big dog, or, and unfortunately that leaves behind a huge amount of grief. So we would love people to have far less grief and to keep firefighters much safer, because the job that they have had for 8 years, 10 years has been really untenable. I think it's too much to ask.
Yeah. And I appreciate the curiosity that you brought to learning about that. And that's what I would encourage everyone to bring to trying to understand fire service capability. I mean, they're in a tough spot, right? Because they are, you're right, the Super Bowl of firefighting is California, right? The most elite fire response. And therefore, when there's a fire, most of the time they can stomp it. And then that creates the expectation that they can stomp it more times than they can, but in the target conditions that burn communities, these high wind events, fast ignition, they can't fly. Even if they could fly, the water wouldn't hit the ground. It's super low, humidity, right? Relative humidity. So the atmosphere is super thirsty and hot, dry, and it's just sucking the moisture that you might even spray into it. And absolutely, like the thing you said about sprinkler systems, I mean, do the things that will passively defend your home first. And maybe, if you have a pool or something, a sprinkler system can be a cherry on top. But it's not a primary, and it shouldn't mean you keep a bunch of vegetation that's highly flammable near your structure because of all the things of when that fire might come and the system might be going down. But I just think that, like, think about the simplest things first. Try to understand the fire services as part of your community, as community members who are primarily trying to keep you from dying and not die themselves, right? And then, like, just bring that curiosity. And I really appreciate Keaton Gibbs's message and Margot Robbins' message. Become intimate with your place, understand the fire history, where you live, accept that fire is part of that, and then just get started on the journey of doing things. And then once you have done the things yourself, which should include, packing up your essentials that you want. Because I've talked to survivors who've had really good, plans of what they wanted to take. And their outcomes in terms of their relationship to the fire that burned their home seems to be quite a bit different, right? They had a number of things they didn't lose because they did that beforehand.
Yeah.
And you just can't do it in the moment, because just think about how long it takes you to pack for vacation. It usually takes several hours to figure out just what you want for a fun vacation. And you can't be doing that stuff in the moment. So.
And also videotape your home every year in advance, because that's like one of the worst things that happens for people is after they lose everything, then having to catalog it all for insurance for your contents coverage is often like the most traumatic piece of all of the paperwork that they have to do, because how are you going to remember like what's in your hallway or where you bought it for or all of the things? And insurance companies, for the most part, will not just hand you, if you have $200,000 in contents coverage, they're not just going to hand you that check without the other side of it. So that's another side too. Okay, I know that we are actually out of time, but I did want you to speak briefly about how policy intersects with you're an environmental law attorney. You do filmmaking, but also you're really good on policy. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I had several friends that were deeply affected by the 2020 Labor Day fires here in Oregon. And I had learned from before that of how horrible it is for people that lose their home and then they get a payment and from someone who's responsible, let's say utilities started the fire. And then they got to pay tax on that. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is horrendous. So I would show up in the legislature in Oregon when asked, when requested by, who I call Senator Wildfire, Senator Jeff Golden, or Representative Wildfire, which is several of them, Pam Marsh.
She's particularly great.
Dacia Graber. These folks that really understand their communities have been affected. They're committed to trying to, get policies that help the built environment, help people, motivate people. And so I'd show up. And so one of them that we've worked together on, Jen, is this piece of, how do we get the U.S. Congress to provide tax relief for fire survivors. And I'd worked, on forest law and policy, taught forest law and policy, worked on land trades and dam removals, and I've worked in Congress on behalf of clients as an attorney for organizations. And I've interacted with Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley before, back in the day. And I know how to interact with these folks and their staff. So one thing I did, to support you and the work that you've done, the tireless advocacy you've done on behalf of survivors, is just go to one of Ron Wyden's town halls and tell the story of my friend, Mayor Ron Carmichael, who lost his home in the 2020 Labor Day fires, had no insurance, had a lawsuit to try to recover for his losses, bought a used mobile home and tried to start rebuilding it with his tired old body. And 2 years later, he was dead from a hernia that he got probably working on that house. And I just went and related that and other stories to Senator Wyden. And I said, this is the right thing to do. This is not even a sale. It's not even a forced sale. It's a forced loss. And it's absolutely obscene for people to be paying tax on this. And we shouldn't put a time frame on them because we don't know when the recovery is going to be. Yep. And, I kind of just broke down in front of the whole entire audience there at his town hall. And then his people came up to me and said, what can we do? And, the result was the first...
Could release the hold.
Release the hold of this thing that you'd been working on forever. So my approach to it is just to go in there, tell a story, a real story. Yes, some science and facts, but generally I'm more like approach it as a human story. And I've gone and opposed things and I've gone and supported things. I don't lobby. I'm not a lobbyist. I just kind of more consider myself a truth teller and a storyteller in there. But yeah, I know how to do it from that experience. And it was the same for getting a congressional land trade through. It was a story about protecting the drinking watershed for farmers and for the community. And I think that we have to do more storytelling. And I'm psyched that like Eric Horn from Megafire and others are trying to do that storytelling in the California legislature around a home outward approach, changing insurance outcomes, getting investment in this thing that we talk about a lot, but I think that we don't do. I think we over-index on the land management and we over-index on the suppression, but we're not doing fire-adapted communities. So I'm a fierce advocate for that and laser focused on it. So I'm psyched to work with whoever wants to do that kind of thing.
Well, and I think one of the things that is clear when you're talking about is so much of it is you can go and tell that's what we do. I mean, I'm an advocate. I've learned that lobbying is not all that hard, quite frankly. If you just go and you build the relationships and they know that you're going to be predictable in the sense that you're going to be you're going to stay on topic, you're going to bring them the story that they need to hear, and you're going to insist that they listen, and they do, and they want to. And we've actually had great, we have a very good relationship on the Hill for all of those things. But there are times when you actually have to call your friend Ralph and say, how are we going to solve this for here? Yeah. How can we make sure the message gets all the way over there? And even though, no shade to Wyden, he's an excellent senator, so it's not that, but it's like sometimes they need that extra push right there to remember that why we could not be combined with all these other things, because fire survivors have suffered hugely and it's all these other cascading effects. Right now we're working on the extension, and the extension has no time limit on when you get them. So I love that part. It's not perfect because it's not into perpetuity, but as far as when the fires happen, but it is into perpetuity for when people get paid. And I think that, I love working on those puzzles together, and I think people are often surprised by how much bipartisanship there is around this particular issue, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't get stuck for reasons that are just so frustrating. So I know that this is a long one, but this is why when Ralph calls, I have to check, do I have an hour for sure? And then I'll call him back when I do. It's so good to see you. I want to drop all of your links below so that people can, watch Weathered, can see the work you've done with Trip Jennings, can watch Elemental and follow you. I appreciate your tenacious. You're very tenacious about wanting to be a storyteller in this space in order to solve this issue or to address the issue in a very human-centric way, which I admire a lot.
Back at you, Jen. I really appreciate the work that you do, and I think it's vital to have folks that are enabling, or bringing forward the voices of fire survivors, and we try to do that in our work as well. And I would just encourage folks that are listening that have been impacted by fire to just keep at it on their journey of moving through grief and loss to understanding and action. And hopefully some of the things that I put out in the world can help them on that journey. So thanks for having me.
I love having you. Thank you for being with us.